This video is not going to be very algorithm friendly. Me saying that is not algorithm friendly, but at the end of the day, for some videos, I have to just kind of not give a shit. I've basically known my whole life that there's something like deeply wrong in the world, and that for some reason it's up to me to fix it. Like I remember even when I was 4 years old, like looking at the fucking staircase or something, asking like, oh, why am I born as this guy? And it was like immediately obvious to me, like, yeah, because there's something wrong in the world that only I can fix or whatever the fuck. So that's basically the trajectory of my life. Like trying for years and years and years to figure out what the hell is it that I need to do? What's the solution? What's the problem even? So it was like a whole bunch of research, trial and error. But in the end, it kind of came together. Like all my knowledge about politics, history, psychology, neurobiology, it came together in the end. But in a way that's so simple, it's kind of bizarre how complicated all the build up to it was. Like the amount of knowledge that I have compared to the end result, it's just like, it's kind of bizarre, but that's usually how it is. Well, like it always seems super obvious in hindsight, right? But there's a reason why people are stuck to begin with. So, in real terms, my whole trying to fix the world thing, it really started when I was 15. I watched this documentary called The Money Masters, which is basically an explanation how actually it turns out that all the world's problems are caused by bankers, and if we just prevent them from doing their financial trickery, things always turn out fine, right? You can see how when you're really young and you're convinced that there's something you need to fix in the world, a narrative like this can be really appealing because it gives you such clarity and it's so simple. But even back then, I could see that, well, it's not just these two banking families doing anything. Like, even if you kill all of them, someone else is going to replace them, obviously, right? So I was thinking, what I really need to figure out is how to eradicate human selfishness, because that's what I thought was the real underlying cause. You can see how fucked up I was back then. So the way I wanted to do it was through neurobiology. I basically thought, okay, there's this new technology called CRISPR for gene editing, so all I need to do is figure out exactly how the brain works, and then I have to basically change up some things to make people less egotistical. Because the way I thought about it back then was just, okay, we're evolved to be in groups of like 50 to 100 maybe, and that's the circle of people we care about, but now in the modern world that number is so much higher. So we need to like adjust the way that the brain works through genetic editing. And I literally thought back then, oh, it's like a slider, you know what I mean? There's this little chunk of neuron somewhere that says how many people you're supposed to care about, and you just tune that up a little and then everything will be fine. So I spent like 2.5 years studying neurobiology, like really in depth. I had this fucking gigantic book that I take to school every day. But in the end, I realized that it's literally not even possible in theory to do something like that. Because an organic system doesn't work the way a machine does, where there's like one broken part somewhere and then you change it and then it works again, right? And this mentality of wanting to eradicate one specific part of human nature, that's by no means specific to me, right? I think most people don't really say this out loud, but implicit in a lot of people's behavior. I won't go into detail, but implicit in a lot of people's behavior, you can see how for example, they're committed to eradicating aggression. They're committed to eradicating greed, like from the human psyche, and they react with hostility every time they see it in any way. Anyway, 7 years pass of me researching all sorts of things. I'm not going to bore you with the details, but I arrived at basically the final boss of like historical geniuses, which is Oswald Spengler. He was like a meta-historian. He wrote about what's the underlying pattern of human history and different human cultures, right? He describes human culture as an organism, like a plant, that has a clear beginning, middle, and end. He equates it to like the seasons of the year. It starts with spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And it's a process of a culture becoming more sterile over time, where organic connections and like animalistic behavior slowly gets replaced by inorganic structures and rationality, and in the end the culture loses its will to live and dies, right? And the things he said lined up so perfectly with what I knew about neurobiology. Like, on an individual level, the way your brain evolves just in your own lifetime is that it starts out super chaotic and interconnected, and as you get older, that chaos, it basically transforms into individual ideas, individual patterns of behavior. So you start out with like an interconnected soup of neurons, and they gradually evolve into individual structures that are isolated from each other. And this is generally understood to be a permanent process. For example, in all civilizations, there's been a clear recipe for how do you take savages and turn them into civilized people, right? You treat them very harshly, you punish them for bad behavior, you force them to like learn to read and write, and you can force them to become civilized, right? But there's never been a recipe for how you do it the other way around. There's never been a recipe for how do you take sterile people that are completely detached from their inner animal instincts and their emotional systems. How do you take that and turn them back into savages, you know what I mean? Or something in between, let's say, or something even that transcends both savagery and civilization. Like, is there some psychological state that isn't inherently unstable, and that's always becoming more sterile as time goes on? None of that has ever been answered, right? It's always been assumed that more rationality, more self-control, that there's no upper limit to how good these things can be. And the analogy with how the human brain works is essentially that you start developing more and more of these individual concepts, these individual islands of neurons in your brain that are separated from each other. You do that for long enough, the individual parts stop making sense in the context of each other, right? It can be either spread out and vague, or it can be concentrated and clear. But if it's concentrated, it also ignores 90% of what's happening, right? And rationality is very much a concentrated form of, processing reality, right? Because it's this step-by-step logical thinking. So that's when I kind of started to see that my whole approach from the beginning was wrong. That the whole mentality of fixing things and figuring out a solution, that in itself was actually part of the problem, because it just accelerates and reinforces the whole process of intellectualizing everything. Like, it removes you from your inner emotional state, it removes you from your inner nature. And around that same time, there was this YouTube channel, Third Paradigm, best channel on YouTube probably. He's quit a long time ago, but his content is really spectacular. And I could also see in his content how, in particular, the instinct of aggression was totally dysfunctional in the modern environment, right? So this was basically where I was at when I was around 22 years old. So I could see what the problem was, but I had no clue whatsoever how to fix it. I only had some kind of idea that if I keep up this endless rationality bullshit, nothing's gonna come of it. Like, literally nothing whatsoever. All the effort I put in, it would mean absolutely nothing. And then it just so happened that a friend of mine that I've known for a long time, Andre, I used to play Rainbow Six with him like years ago. We would play all the time. And he basically asked me if I wanted to come over because I was living in Denmark at the time. He lives in Sweden. So it was like, yeah, sure, why the fuck not? Because normally I would have just said, no, I have important things to do, fuck off. I need to follow my plan. But because of this knowledge that I already had, I could see that, no, actually, this is probably exactly what I need to be doing. Like, doing something without having a clear reason. And I also had a concept of, he knows something that I don't. Because the whole time while I was researching these big things, how to like fix all the bad things that are going on in the world, he was just trying to get bitches, basically. Like, I remember even when, I think I was 18 and he was 15, he was like telling me about how he's studying the art of seduction and how to get girls. And I just thought, like, what a waste of fucking time, dude. Like, I was usually making fun of him for doing this because I just thought it was silly. It has nothing to do with the real problems and all that shit. And it was really fucking nice, like, living together with him instead of alone in my shitty apartment in Denmark that I was paying 1,000 euros a month for. And about a week into going there, he told me something that made everything click together. He told me, the thing that people get wrong about seduction is it's not about figuring out what you need to say. It's not about deciding what you need to do and putting your attention on yourself. It's all about noticing the other person and noticing your own emotional state based on how the other person is acting and noticing their emotional state. So it has nothing to do with strategy or planning. You're obviously trying to get something done, but the way of thinking, the way of perceiving reality is completely the opposite. Like, it's just focused on emotional states and the changes in emotional states, right? Because obviously, How are you going to emotionally connect with someone if you're completely stuck in rational thought, thinking, oh, what should I say? Maybe I'll say this and that'll create that reaction. Oh, but I can say this other thing and that might create an even better reaction, right? When you're stuck in that state, you've already disconnected yourself from the other person you're trying to get with. Even if you play things perfectly, you say all the correct jokes, it's still a fundamentally fake connection based on performance, and that anxiety will always be in the back of your head, right? And that's when it all fucking came together for me. Like, I'm never gonna forget that fucking day. And at this point, 3 years have passed since that day. Because obviously the transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's just you apply it to your life, you start living in that way, and your personality starts changing without you even realizing it consciously. Now you might be thinking, okay, so now my whole mission is to get other people to have this big realization or whatever the fuck that I had. But not really. I mean, if you watch my other content, you can see what are the next steps in my life, what kind of people I need to be part of that, and all that shit. But I'm not going into it with the approach of, okay, this is how I am, and this is the things I know, and everyone who doesn't know it is like, I have to fix that, and that's like problematic, you know what I mean? Like, that's just the wrong approach to begin with. It's just stressful to approach life in that way. It's ridiculous. Like, I was so fucking lost. I was so fucking stressed out all the time for almost my whole life. I was just clinging to this idea that someday in the future, all these expectations will actually amount to something. And I guess now that I'm at this point in my life where it really isn't that bad anymore, and it's all about just getting the things done that I know need to be done. It's just about making things even better, just getting the ball rolling even further. The way that I've organized the rest of my content is basically every video has a small hint of the bigger picture, because it's almost not even possible for me to explain the bigger picture. It would just be way too difficult, but every video has a small hint of it, and you're probably going to be able to put it together pretty quickly.